Good afternoon, dear participants of the conference. I'm Mikhail Nemtsev. I'm going to discuss militarization of politics of history in Russia. By no means I think that militarization is something that happens only in contemporary Russia. I think that this notion is useful when we discuss politics of history in different countries, in Europe and not in Europe as well. Let's begin with small banner, not small, well, with a banner which someone could see walking on the streets of Moscow last summer. Here it is. It very openly connects this fight with coronavirus and defense of Moscow during the Great Patriotic War. So the person who invented this banner somehow tried to show that people who fight against coronavirus are, in a sense, openly, directly connected to the people who fought with guns and other weapon in hands during the Second World War. The question is, how is it possible and why does it emerge? Why does this kind of connection ever pop up in someone's head? Why do people try to connect this historical event with something that goes on? I mean, not of course we try to somehow refute our actions, connecting them with the past. But here is a very special connection, which somehow equals something that happens in a very peaceful city with civilians, with military events of the past. So what is the nature of this connection? I would think that it makes sense to discuss to try to answer this question, speaking about two connected processes in contemporary Russia. One of them, the biggest process, is the development of historical politics, which is in turn part of state ideology process, of the process of establishment of state ideology. The second process is militarization. So this concept of militarization helps to understand now why historical references refer to military experience, or in other words, why war as topic is so privileged when we mention history. By militarization, I mean the bridge of this separation of civilian and military. In modern societies, this separation of civilian and military is crucial. So, civilians do the everyday routine activities while military personnel follows their duty and engages in some military activities somewhere else, but they do different jobs in different parts of the land, and they don't have any intermediate connections. So militarization happens when we speak about civil life in terms of military actions. It has different levels. It's like an everyday routine in functioning of institutions, on the level symbols, on the level state internal politics, in religious rituals, and so on. Here you see an example of this, an icon which has a symbol of a paratroopers on itself, which is not usual for Orthodox tradition, of course. Following Martin's show, I want to discuss militarism as the penetration of social relations in general by military relations. So it somehow shows that military forms are carried into the civilian sphere, and it changes mentality, attitudes, and social practices as well. This concept has quite a long, quite not long, somehow interesting history in sociology of 20th century, and Michael Mann is the key figure here. But I don't want to go deep into this history. What I want to discuss is that sometimes we see that even parts of our everyday routine are somehow connected with functioning of army and with different military activities. So if institution or something else is controlled by, dependent on, or derives its value from the military activities in a way, then we can say that it is militarized. Here in this quote, the authors discuss militarization of a can of a tomato soup. So what is more far from an army than a tomato soup, but it might be militarized as well. So of course, then they speak about some processes, some historical references, historical events, monuments, street names, and so on. It's much easier to militarize them than to militarize a can of tomato soup. So militarization of history is a state-approved and a state-driven presentation of national history as controlled by, dependent on, or deriving its value from army and military strength of recent or distant past. Take, for example, two monuments to Mikhail Kalashnikov, who invented this great, very famous automatic rifle, Automat Kalashnikova. On the left, you see him presented as just as a person, as an engineer in the middle age, and he has a personality here. On the right, you see a new monument erected in the very center of Moscow. And here, Mikhail Kalashnikov is presented somehow as a support for his famous invention. So there are alternatives. Two monuments to the same person here represent two alternatives of how militarized and non-militarized images might be developed. Public presentations of national history do not necessarily have to be militarized. So the militarization of history itself needs rational explanation. And that's why I want to look at this banner from which I began as something that requires an explanation. Why is it possible to connect coronavirus epidemic measures today with siege of the capital during the last World War in Russia? So this is something we must explain as researchers. In Russia, the militarization of national history that goes along with consolidation of national historical politics. And this is my principal thesis here. Let's consider several cases of militarization. First of them is the introduction of Georgievsky Lentach, or St. George ribbon, which was invented in 2005 as a sign or as a measure to show appreciation of a heroic past. And it became extremely popular in country. You could see it everywhere. People decorated themselves, they decorated buildings and used it as a universal symbol of their belongingness to the heroic past of Russia. Obviously, this ribbon was taken from the part. Historically, this ribbon was a part of military decoration. It's a very recognizable symbol of military courage, decoration of St. George. And it was appropriated by Soviet military authorities, used during the Soviet period as a part of military decorations. And now it was taken into civilian life and used as a sign of broadly understood belongingness to this and appreciation of this heroic history. So I added some references to good articles in which articles to which I refer to the the studies of this past. Okay, so Paul Coster was writing extensively about history of this ribbon. In 2014, this ribbon became a symbol of so-called Russian Spring. It was used and even abused by people who fought against Ukraine in the eastern part of Ukraine. And since then, it became somehow compromised and because it was connected with certain kind of political activism. But still, it is used in Russia by people and by state authorities to show as a reference to the heroic deeds of the national past. Okay, another case is this main cathedral of the Russian armed forces, which was consecrated in this June. And this consecration was a part of nationwide celebration of 75th anniversary of the great victory in the Great Patriotic War. You can see that, well, the church is painted in a khaki-like color, which is unusual for Russian Orthodox tradition. It is permitted, but it's not usual. And in itself, it resembles kind of missile on a launch spot from outside. It was designed in this way and very consciously. And in a sense, this main cathedral connects Russian religious traditions with traditions of Russian militarism. It blend them and makes kind of mixture in which you cannot separate religion, army memory, historical appreciation of history, and sacred aspects of this building. It has a lot of symbols embodied in it. This picture comes from the official website of this khram, of this church. Khram is this word loosely used in Russia now for a church building. You can see that they have different numerical symbols, and all that symbols, they require certain knowledge of history, like, you know, is eight windows on the main dome. They symbolize 8th of May, and so on. And here they somehow imply that the knowledge that the people must know history as a combination of facts, of numerical facts. How long the duration of war, how long did it take? 75 years since the victory. People who came in there might somehow decipher this embodiment, and in case this person knows history well enough, this person would feel that this church is somehow an embodiment of memory as such, and feel something about this. This project was heavily criticized in Russia, but it is a very bright example of how politics of history and how militarized politics of history is now made in here. This third case is a case of so-called war calendar. It was discussed in the beginning of 2020, and well, this calendar was an act of creation by some company which sells different goods online. You can see that people took some children and gave them the military garment resembling this uniform of the Second World War, and they staged some like battlefield scenes and made the calendar. So here, victory is a universal reference point, right? And they obviously exploit easily recognizable Soviet army symbols, like guns, like different parts of the uniform, and so on. And this was produced as a commodity. I mean, they did this to sell images of war to anyone who would like to buy it. So they obviously expected people to acknowledge this cult of Victory Day and cult of military involvement into the of participation in this memory by somehow um, taking seriously images like this. And it gives a way to the first hypothesis explaining why militarization is so appreciated by the population. But before that, I should say some words about Putinism. So then we explain the militarization of history. We can use the concept of mature Putinism. Mature Putinism, I use this notion as a name for a coherent ideology which emerged in Russia since 2011, and somehow it requires militarization of history. The main event on this in the development of this ideology was annexation of Crimea and war against Ukraine since the spring of 2014, dubbed by some by some people as the Russian Spring. So this military event needed some historical justification. And that's why history was somehow reshaped into a long justification of this deed. So history somehow must justify this war event. That's why history had to be militarized. Before that, in 2012, Russian Military Historical Society was established, and the Minister of Culture managed to develop it. And he was the leader he still is the leader of Russian Military Historical Society, and each organization invests huge amount of efforts and of activities into development of military history. They erect monuments, they publish documents, they make conferences, and so on. What is interesting here is that this society was established and sponsored by the highest officials in the country, which means that military history is of utmost concern for them. Well, this Putinism had some aspects called geopolitical aspects. I cannot translate this word geopolitica into English, unfortunately, because in Russia it has some quite interesting connotations which cannot be grasped by English geopolitics. So I put it here without translation. So in the nutshell, geopolitica is a worldview in which Russia always stays against the consolidated West. So from the enemies come from the West, Russia defends itself always successfully, and it's like the main rule of the nation history. We are against the West. Here in this cartoon, this world perception is somehow depicted, I believe. So in this case, military history is the essential part of national history as such. History of Russia is a history of defensive war, which lasted for centuries. Sometimes it ceases, sometimes it's like emerges, it begins again and again. And the annexation of Crimea is just an episode in this long history. So this perception of national history is very typical for the ideology of mature Putinism, I think. And that's why it requires some presentation of national history as militant history, is militarized. Well, another concept which is useful here is effective management of history. I borrow it from Sergei Ushakin. He spoke about performative patriotism. Performative patriotism is, in a sense, is approach to history when facts and events of the past are not registered for the historical significance, I quote, but they are emotionally relived and reenacted. So if you want to appreciate history, you must somehow reproduce it by your body. You must perform it. Obviously, military events are the easiest ones to perform. Obviously, if you want to play history, the military history is the number one on the list to be reenacted. Here you can see historical reconstruction in Surgut. So reconstructors, they heavily involved now in different historical celebrations, so people can try to take part in history by this reenactment, and it's very popular as not in Russia but in other countries as well. That's why military history has a kind of boom interest now. Well, some additional explanation is this concept of affective history as communicative operator. Sergei Ushakin speaks about post-Soviet aphasia, an ability to discuss relations, an ability to discuss, post-Soviet aphasia is the situation when people have no commonly shared communicative tools to establish meaningful communication and discuss their relations and discuss their situation. They have no general ideology to rely on, and they do not have any common language. In this situation, historical events are the most, you have to refer to historical event to get some common ground in discussions. Well, militarized history is effectively is history which produces effects. So it gives emotions, and you cannot use historical events as such, but you can refer to emotions. And that's why maybe this person who spoke about Bitva za Moscow, about Battle for Moscow in 2020, was right. So this person could refer to commonly shared affect, this description of Battle of Moscow, defense of Moscow in the Second World War. This action produces a lot of effects, and now we can somehow reproduce this effect to become mobilized enough to take part in a shoulder by shoulder standing against the epidemic of coronavirus. We can discuss a dynamic model of militarization of history. So here I speak about major Putinism. In other countries, of course, we could discuss different ideologies. But in Russia, major Putinism needs ideology, and this ideology is heavily grounded in history. So military history society was supported and developed by the highest officials. It's something they really need as an institution. This history is militarized because it is used against West. And at the same time, from the grassroots level, there is a request for reenactment of military experience, because it produces effect, and you can manage this history as effective history, and it also satisfies social requests for common communicative tools. So in a way, there is no way for history to avoid being militarized. I think this is something that requires an additional research and thinking. Thank you for your attention. Here are some information about me, and I also manage Facebook group dedicated to the collection of facts about militarism in Russia, militarization in Russia. You can use this group as well to study this process further. Thank you.